welcome to each and every one of you. And so I'm super excited and grateful and honored for each one of you who are joining us live tonight, as well as every single one of you who watch the replays on YouTube or in the Facebook group or on Instagram or TikTok or anywhere else that you see them, or if people share them with you. I am grateful for every single one of you that watch these. And so I'm grateful to spend the time with you. We are going to kick off a new series that we're calling The Path of Healing. We're going to kick it off with the path of physical symptoms and how these symptoms are created and the brain and body connection and why they kind of stick around and linger. And so I'm going to start this off with sharing a little bit of my story. And this is a part of my story that I don't very often share. And so I'm going to ask for your grace in advance because it's not necessarily the easiest story to share, which is why I don't share it publicly very often. Long before I was introduced to Solle, much before, when I was a child, I grew up in a very small town in South Texas, about 45 minutes from the Mexican border. My father was an attorney and he was a judge and a public elected official. And I very frequently experienced as a child different things in relation to his public office and things like that. And so by the age of 8, I had survived 2 attempted kidnapping attacks. I had experienced a stalker for 2 years. And at the age of 8, he broke into our home, came into my bedroom and touched me inappropriately in the middle of the night. And at that time in my life, my little childhood body began to create these safety mechanisms in the brain and the body. And I started to become hyper aware and hypersensitive to every single thing around me. Fast forward a little bit, at the age of 14, I was finally officially diagnosed with anxiety disorder. And by this time, I had created a perception of untrust from anybody. And I was very, very, very much aware of when things didn't line up or when things just didn't, click, like people were saying things, but their actions weren't really lining up. And this went with me for the rest of my adulthood. When I had my son, I experienced another very traumatic pregnancy. I ended up delivering him at 29 weeks by emergency C-section. And it was a very traumatic experience in and of itself. And coming out of that, leaving him in the NICU, leaving the hospital as a new mom, I developed postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety disorder. So postpartum anxiety disorder, I would sit beside his bedside, his crib, and literally watch him breathe. And about every 5 minutes would check to make sure that he was still alive. And then the postpartum depression, I would oscillate between those two, where when I was in that, I literally could only think about harming myself or even my child. And so it took me a lot to come out of this. And this whole path of everything that I've gone on throughout my life is the reason why I've dedicated my life to studying the brain and studying how that connects with our brain. So much so that, of course, I graduated from high school early, went on to college, went on to get my graduate studies, 16 postgraduate certifications, because in the end, I thought that maybe I could figure out a way to fix my own broken brain. One of the things I've discovered, though, is that my brain is not actually broken. It's actually working in the exact way, the most magnificent way that it's supposed to, because it's wired to protect us for safety. So I want to fast forward a little bit further. I was introduced to Solle right when I was in one of my most stressed out states as an adult. My body was overworked and burnout. And it was triggering all of these same fears, these same anxieties. And I was gaining weight and I couldn't sleep and all the things. And I was introduced to Solle at that time. And I didn't believe it was going to work because nothing had worked. And the doctors had run out of things to help me. And so what I experienced was really pretty incredible for me. And I can say 5 years later, there's not a single day that goes by that I don't literally flood my body with Solle products. And the reason why I do that is because one of the things that I have discovered is that when I feel my body nutritionally with these tools, these adaptogens, these formulas, I live a better life. And I won't say that it's always perfect. There's times where I experience stress, right? I just went through a traumatic divorce in the last couple of years. And that was really stressful. And I won't say that I didn't have a flare up during that time, and specifically a flare up of anxiety. So there's very frequently times that I wake up and I experience the physical symptoms, and I experience the anxiety, the tightness in my chest, the pain in my back, all of those things. But because I have the nutritional tools that I have, usually within an hour, hour and a half of waking up, I can be back to functioning at peak performance. So with that being said, tonight we're going to talk about how this happens, how things can happen to us in our past, how things can happen to us when we're ill, or different sicknesses that we could have, even as adults, and how that can change the way we experience life from then on. So, has your brain learned to be unwell, right? That's what we're talking about tonight. The truth about why physical symptoms linger and how to flip the switch. Really and truly, this is really about understanding the brain and the body connection and why we may experience physical symptoms. And the reality is that chronic pain and chronic symptoms and chronic challenges that we have, these look different for everybody. For some, the journey might begin in childhood, like it did for me. For others, it begins at the onset of symptoms. Maybe you were in an accident, or maybe you experienced a challenging experience as an adult, or maybe you got a really bad illness. Whatever it is, for some of us, it will develop right from the onset of symptoms. But regardless whether your journey begins in childhood or whether it begins at the onset of symptoms, all the paths are equally valid and real. I'm going to tell this story, what the path of chronic symptoms looks like, all the way back from childhood, because I know some of you might relate to this. And again, this is very similar to my story. So during childhood, the nervous system learns to detect danger. And with each experience that may feel, physically or emotionally unsafe, the brain learns to go into protective mode more quickly. And the alarm system of the brain may become increasingly sensitive. And so when faced with challenges, children often try to reduce conflict by behaving a little different way. I even said in my story, I graduated from high school early. I was one of those kids that always got incredible grades and all the things. As a matter of fact, it's very, very, very common for children who, as they become increasingly sensitive and hyper aware, it can even lead them to become like perfectionists or even people pleasers in adulthood. And so some of you might relate to this, where you're sitting there and thinking, oh, I have some, I'm definitely more like a perfectionist, right? Or yes, I have these people pleasing tendencies as an adult. But the cost that comes with that is it's a learned ongoing state of tension and vigilance in the nervous system. What's happening when we live in perfectionism or people pleasing, or when we hold back from saying things because we're worried about other people, like kind of that walking on eggshells part, is that our nervous system is in this constant state of vigilance. As I said, I live in an experience of constantly being aware of when things feel unsafe or not trustworthy, or they just feel off and I can't move forward. The other thing that happens to us is we can have health scares and health experiences during childhood. And this can have a huge impact on how protective the nervous system becomes as well. So these could be things like an accident where you had a major surgery. You could have injury. You could have some kind of diagnosis that could lead to, pain, like pain catastrophizing, where we have this more intense experience of pain. And what's actually happening is there's a part of our brain that's actually getting very much increased activity at this time. And like I said, this is a learned pattern and a learned behavior where the brain just constantly keeps wiring for these tendencies of being unsafe, being hyper vigilant, being hyper aware and hypersensitive to these experiences. Then as we grow up, we get everyday adult stress, right? When an overprotective nervous system meets this everyday stress of adulthood, it often responds by producing physical symptoms. And this may show up in the form of headaches. Maybe it shows up in the form of stomach issues or gastrointestinal issues. It can be muscle tension, backaches, rapid heart rate, any of these types of things. And then as life goes on, just like that everyday stress, we can also have major life changes that can often coincide with the development of even new or worsened symptoms. Some of these common events, they're changes in relationship status, changes in housing, death or loss of a loved one, a change in employment or career, ongoing discrimination, change in financial standing, even involvement in an abusive relationship, whether that's physical or emotional or psychological, any type of abuse, or some kind of traumatic event, even as traumatic as going into lockdown in unexpected years because of global pandemic. Then as we continue on, at any point in this cycle, this overactive nervous system can hit basically its tipping point. And it can begin the cycle of chronic symptoms. And these symptoms may begin with, like an injury or, some kind of underlying pathology where you get sick, right? Or they could appear out of the blue. But what usually happens is maybe you had a car accident or you had a shoulder injury or something like that. And even though the tissue has healed and really and truly there should be no more pain, our body has learned it. And so oftentimes I'll talk to people and they'll say, oh, I woke up at 3 a.m. My shoulder was really bothering me. And oftentimes as I talk to them more, I discover that they're actually dealing with some, unexpected stress or maybe some normal stress. And so although they're relating it to an old shoulder injury that they had previously, it's not actually the old shoulder injury that's actually causing the discomfort and the physical challenges. It's actually the neural learned behavior in the brain. And so some of these chronic symptoms that we see very frequently are migraines, fibromyalgia, fatigue, back pain. You could have neck or shoulder pain, as I said, hand or wrist pain, right? Any type of knee pain or maybe ankle pain, right? Oftentimes we'll see like IBS or other GI issues, or really any other physical symptom or any type of physical challenge that lasts for more than 2 to 3 months. Like it just kind of lingers. It just really won't go away, even though you've addressed the acute issue at the time. So the thing is that the nervous system is exceptionally plastic, which means it can pick up habits easily. And these physical symptoms are one of those habits, right? And the more the nervous system practices activating a certain symptom, whether it's some kind of pain or whether it's that queasiness in your stomach or whether it's, irritable bowel syndrome or anything like that, the easier it becomes to activate it again and again and again. And so as this pain and as these physical symptoms and as these things become easier to activate, we typically call these things chronic. And many people experience basically a sensitivity adjustment. Basically, the brain becomes even more protective, right? It becomes more well-versed at detecting danger and triggering a pain response or a physical symptom, even when no danger at all is present. And so these symptoms and this pain and these different challenges and discomfort, they don't just impact the brain or the body, they impact every single aspect of our life, including our physical activity levels, our social life, our relationships, even our own identity, our mental health, and our daily routine. And because of this, oftentimes, that when the brain changes and these life changes that come along with all of this, they provide this fuel that kind of causes like this downward spiral, right? And what will happen is that the activities that would normally, naturally relieve our symptoms become restricted. And then this fear and vigilance and hypersensitivity actually grows even bigger. As the brain processes these chronic challenges using this fear system, it literally begins to just wire in and wire in. So what do we do about it? In order to reverse the cycle of pain, we have to engage the rational part of the brain, right? We have to purposely focus and get this prefrontal cortex up here more involved, right? And so there's a couple of things that are really, really key. And I'll promise you that right now you're doing one of them. Because simply learning about how the brain and the body actually works and how these physical challenges and chronic symptoms actually are created helps your prefrontal cortex play a larger role. Because as you begin to discover what's causing these things, then your brain begins to become more aware, right? And this can lead to self-discovery, where we're really starting to be able to look at, oh, I'm experiencing this. Why am I experiencing this? What's going on? What's going on in my environment, or what's going on in my life, right? To have me experience this. And this self-discovery activity actually helps our nervous system to feel safe again, right? This is actually critical so that we can understand, okay, what made me feel this way? What made my body feel and brain feel unsafe? And we can begin to understand the nervous system's journey and what's going on and what's making it go into that protective mode. And this provides a clear map of a way out. Now, here's the good news. We can create new neural pathways, right? Because once we have this new perspective on what's causing these symptoms and pains and challenges, it's possible to start teaching our old nervous system new tricks. And we can begin to integrate joy and play and gratitude and physical activity and, cleaner food and powerful nutrition and all of these things that began to release these natural healing chemicals in our body, right? And the more of these new habits that we practice, the more things that we put in place, the more comfortable our nervous system will become. I know you're thinking like, Erica, this all sounds great, right? And I'm starting to implement the things, right? Like I'm eating better and I'm doing all these things, but maybe I'm not getting exactly where I want to be. So what gets in the way, right? What gets in the way of our healing? There are 9 hidden healing obstacles that get in your way of optimal wellness. We're going to start with number 1 is letting fear into the driver's seat. Now, without the awareness and action, the body is programmed to slip into that survival mode, that fear mode, that protective mode, right? Much more often than necessary, just as we just discussed. You could start to notice the small warning signs in your body that your danger system has taken over. Like whenever you start to get that muscle tension, or if you get a little elevated heart rate, or maybe, you're just starting to feel a little anxious, right? And when you realize that this is happening, I invite you to take a deep breath and remind your brain that there's no real danger in the present moment. And then take a step back, because oftentimes you will discover that this action in and of itself will start to relieve some of the symptoms. Now, number 2, obstacle that is keeping you and getting in your way from optimal wellness is assuming you are stuck with your body's existing conditions and patterns. And so the experience of, physical challenges or pain or, any of these symptoms, they can alter the nervous system to be hypersensitive in a way that feels permanent. right? Like, so if you have gastrointestinal pain or IBS, and every time you eat and it's causing a lot of symptoms, that can feel like every time I eat XYZ thing, I have this symptom, but it's actually not permanent. And if you catch yourself spiraling into those thoughts about, this bleak future that you have, it's time to go ahead and shift your brain's focus again. Number 3 is trying to be the best at healing, right? Trying to be the best at this, at this optimal wellness journey. And this is, again, part of that tendency of perfectionism and oversensitivity and vigilance, because never cutting yourself any slack, feeling the pressure to lose weight overnight, heal overnight, get rid of these symptoms overnight. These are all part of that, because guess what? This journey of optimal wellness, it's not a competition, right? And treating it like one will lead to setbacks and feelings of inadequacy. Now, another hidden obstacle to your healing is accepting your inner critic's words as facts. Now, let's face it, many of us, our inner critic is actually probably the strongest voice we have. And it can be kind of harsh sometimes, right? But its words can only hurt you if you believe them to be true. So the next time your inner critic is making you question yourself, look for the words like always and never, like this never happens, or this always happens, or I always do this, or I never do this. Because those almost always tend to be exaggerations. And go ahead and see if you can fact check your inner critic and rephrase those thoughts. Now, another hidden obstacle to your healing path is not putting yourself on the list of people to take care of. It is very common that oftentimes we want to serve others. And maybe you're the one that's always, looking for friends and family members, and you're always helping them out. This is the time in your healing journey to go ahead and give yourself that healing time. Don't put yourself last on the list, right? Go ahead and make sure your own needs are met. And I encourage you to do this by scheduling yourself a calendar appointment, weekly or daily or whatever it is, that's basically just your time for healing, whatever it looks like, whether it's joy, whether it's play, whether it's gratitude, whatever you want to do for yourself. Just schedule that in the calendar and make sure you're taking care of yourself and working hard to protect that time for yourself. Now, another healing obstacle is failing to examine your past, because maybe you had it better than most, or, maybe you've already, done the work, right? The reality is, until we've really examined our past and we've really gone through, the things that could have rewired our nervous system, we may not ever really find that optimal wellness we're looking for. Because even in situations where you grew up in a loving family and everyone was doing really good, because here's the thing, guys, I grew up in a loving family and my parents did the best they could, right? It's still important to understand the impact that your relationships and your environment and everything had on forming your personal nervous system patterns. Another hidden obstacle is number 7, unconsciously hanging onto the sunny side. The reality is that, for better or worse, sometimes these challenges, these physical symptoms, seep into our identity. Like, we might actually identify ourselves as, I am a blank survivor, or I am a blank whatever. And like, I am a migraine sufferer or whatever. Because change is challenging, even when it's positive, right? And so sometimes by acknowledging the unexpected perks of, these things, we can actually leave them behind once and for all. And what I mean by unexpected perks is, sometimes when we begin to take the identity on of having a certain experience, a physical challenge, it actually gives us an unexpected benefit. Like, if we're a migraine sufferer and we've identified as that, we get time to be alone in quiet rooms and have extra rest all by ourselves. So the body is actually getting what it needs from creating the symptoms of the physical challenges. So when we acknowledge that, these unexpected perks, and we begin to start to give ourselves those things that we actually need through that healing time for ourselves every week, then our body won't have to create those symptoms as long. Now, another healing obstacle is focusing on all work and no play. You can't just heal by doing all the hard work, right? You have to learn more about play and create these better nervous system pathways. So we want to build in positive pathways: joy, play, gratitude. These are things are not just for fun, but they are absolutely essential to living your optimally well life. And the number 9 is not creating a plan for the future, because healing ultimately is a process. You can't just assume that, once you start and you start like, I'm drinking these drinks, or I'm taking these things, and then my symptoms seem to have disappeared, that they're going to be gone forever. Because again, sometimes we have unexpected events that trigger these flare-ups again. So we want to plan ahead. We want to incorporate healing into our daily lifestyle and set yourself up for lifetime success. And I'm going to encourage you, if you see any of these obstacles as something that you struggle with, I would encourage you to come and continue to come to these workshops every single week, because we are going to go over all the things that you need to overcome fear, to transform your mindset of your body, to transform your mindset of your identity, and how to enjoy life's everyday activities and to feel connected and supported in your healing journey. We can do this through becoming aware, but there's also some nutritional tools that can really help us out. And I like to consider it as creating that space for healing, so that our body and our brain can start to rewire together and create better alignment for our optimal wellness and healing. For our soul connection, I've invited Greg Halliday, the president and founder of Soul Naturals, to come and share with us these powerful nutritional tools that we find in adaptogens, and how they can basically work to help us to rewire and reconnect the brain and body, and help us to fire better neural networks, so that we have less stress and all of that in our future.
Well, they can really do that, Erica. Thank you. And wow, I can't wait for this series. The last series was fantastic. This one, those 9 points that you've delineated, I wish everyone could hear them. I wish every single household could hear them and get a little bit of education about them from you, because I think each and every one of those is an absolute life changer to understand. And that's just listening to the short time tonight, your intro. I'm super excited for that and super impressed. When Soul was founded, it is this last point that Erica made, that nutrition can actually influence our stress response as much as any other physical aspect can be influenced by nutrition. I see what I see in these last 10 years at Soul, and over the 30 some odd years that I've been involved in this industry, is a greater and greater number of people believe that changing their nutrition will change their physical health. I wish that same number would know that our emotional and cognitive well-being is just as influenced by nutrition. I deeply believe that, because we've seen that. And it was the reason that we formulated the products in Soul as we did. When Soul was founded a little over 10 years ago, you know what came first in the founding discussions? That we would build formulas that nourish both physical and emotional correlating conditions. So like certain physical conditions correlate with certain emotional and cognitive mental issues. That was the first premise of Soul. The second premise that came along with it, and I will tell you openly, it came months down the road as we began building Soul. That was the adaptogens. I think some people maybe think, oh, we found these adaptogens and said, let's build a company around them. But truthfully, that's not how it happened. It happened over time and learning as an examination, similar to the way Erica has presented it to us, that we became convinced that building nutrition in a more concentrated fashion, so a supplement versus just meals, that fed both emotional and physical needs and that matched them up, in a number of different ways would make a big difference and was something not available. That actually came through first. And as we built formulas and investigated more deeply adaptogenic herbs, we came to describe the core nutrition at Solle around adaptogens. But I will tell you, they really were the most powerful discovery down the road, in the early road of journey, in building Solle's formulas. In fact, our name, Solle, is meant to sound like S-O-U-L. It's a homonym for the word soul, which is combining the physical and the mental and emotional. And you could add spiritual in there. It is that interconnected and that holistic, really our complete self, that has to be addressed in our nutrition. And that's a novel thought for many people. I still think it's a very small percentage of the world's population that even thinks that there can be great strength and inroads through nutrition in our complete and overall wellness. And education's a big part of that. When we change education, we do change decisions that we make for ourselves and for others. So let me just say real briefly why adaptogens are such a big part. And Eric asked me to talk about that tonight. There's a lot you can read about adaptogens. They have been around forever. Obviously, the Chinese knew about them. They didn't describe them as such, but they used them in India and in Ayurveda. I'm just naming those two disciplines because they wrote about their beliefs and their structure and their their process of healing. Included among both of these were many adaptogenic herbs. In fact, if you look at my shelves here, this is a little bit of my bookshelf. You might notice a couple of bookends that are from China, a trip that I took a while ago. And I don't know if you can see, do you see an elephant over there? Yeah, that's India. And they're in my office because so many of these adaptogens and a key part of our formulas come from both those disciplines, but we don't limit it to that. There's very much here in the West and in South America and in North America that we're just discovering. And so we really credit a lot of more recent researchers with maybe mapping out what adaptogens are, giving them the name. These are more recent researchers, like say in the last 60 years. 70 years, I guess, right around there. The name was coined. And in fact, a lot of the studies that are within the last 20 years, you'll read that the researchers talk about adaptogens as a, quote, a new class of herbs. Well, there's nothing new about the herbs, but there is something new about the classification. And if it helps our understanding and it gets us to integrate them, then we benefit greatly and everyone can benefit greatly. So in my opinion, I boil down adaptogens into 5 things. And if you think about what Erica's talked about, it's pretty easy to see why those 5 things can make a difference. Those 5 attributes, 5 characteristics. I will freely admit that there is not an official register requiring those 5 things. They are Solle's way of sort of boiling down, assimilating the various writing and understanding of adaptogens into 5 points. They work for me because they work on a real straightforward plane. Adaptogens are energy givers, but not stimulants. Adaptogens improve in a great way our resistance. Everything to do with the immune system and emotional resistance, or in other words, the body's protective processes that they can perform as they're meant to, and not be out of balance either through underperformance or hyperperformance, which in turn damages. I mean, Erica just gave us a great overview of how the nervous system becomes hyper and actually creates more problems for us or damages us. So that's the second point of an adaptogen, is to modulate that. The third is that adaptogens are full of many different components and very balanced in their nutrition. So rather than some plants that might just have a few key ingredients, adaptogens have many. And with those many different components, they are balanced to have components on either side of imbalance. That is, depleted states or overactive states. Underactive or overactive might be the best way of saying that. That's the third characteristic of adaptogens. The fourth would be that adaptogens, and I actually think I've blended 2 of them now that I think I got a little excited tonight. One point is there are very many active components, and the second point is that they are balanced. Then the last point, so the fifth finger, is that there is a marked elevation in our body's stress response. If you want to look at it as a natural resilience to stress, meaning we can navigate it without, as Erica says, crossing the tipping point that sends us into a damaging scale. That is what we're referencing. And adaptogens, each one of them, one of the greatest indicators that a plant may be a pure adaptogen is that there is a direct modulation of the body's ability to handle stress, generally by increasing our resilience. There are lots of reasons for that, and there are lots of ways, and they're different. Each of the adaptogens are different in the way they do that, but they have that commonality. So adaptogens, and you know what? I just realized the fifth finger that I forgot to mention with you. The fifth finger, I'm going to say them one more time. And the fifth finger is that they're what the Chinese classify as superior herbs, safe in the quantities necessary for daily use. It all starts with something safe, or you can't match it to you and to your needs. So you have that, you have the energy, but not stimulant. You have this wonderful resistance and immune modulation. You have all the balanced nutrition on either side of imbalance and broad and varied nutrients. And then you have this wonderful resilience, increased resilience for emotional and mental well-being. Those are the five aspects. I remember them like the five fingers of my hand. And that is what came along the pathway as Solle developed formulas, and what we continue to investigate. From time to time, as we do add new formulas, you'll often see a new adaptogen. It isn't because we think the others don't work. It's because they all have their superpower, to put it in a way that I like to describe. And they do it a little differently. And blending them can be quite productive and insightful to us, and can bring answers where sometimes for a particular individual or individuals are still not coming in the other formulas they're using, but now they do come with an adaptogen. So this is the reason for many in Solle, and why we're so committed to the journey, why adaptogens are such a great fit for what Eric is talking about.
I love it. And I want to kind of talk about that last thing you said about the new things that come on, because I will say that in my journey with Solle, when I started, I kind of felt like, oh, this is as good as it's going to get. And that I didn't really imagine that anything could get better. And then I added NeuroIM in 4 years ago or so. And I was like, wow, this is even getting better, right? And then I was like, okay, this is it. This is as best it's going to get. And then when Royal was released, a year ago, I was like, yeah, and how does this keep getting better? And so, interestingly enough, I mean, they just kind of work in different places in my body and in my brain, and it just kind of affects me differently. And so, I've definitely noticed those switches as I've just added in the little pieces as they've come along. Saw a question up here about adaptogens interfering with taking medications. And I'm going to say this first off. If you're on a medication, then, for another condition of any type, you definitely want to talk to your primary care provider and let them know. And I will say this. I like to say more that medications are more the interference. So it is possible that your body will not respond to the medication in the same way, with adding the adaptogen, but adaptogens in and of themselves, just like Greg said, are safe, right? But again, for your own protection, talk to your primary care provider if you're on medications, and let them tell you, because depending on what your medication is, you might need to space them out. I do generally recommend this. So just overall recommendation, I do recommend taking your herbs away from your pharmaceutical meds. Again, usually at least 2 hours. But the reason why I recommend that is not because of the herbs, it's because of the pharmaceutical meds, right? So they interfere with the way the body processes. And so that's the reason why I recommend it in that way. If a plant is not an adaptogen, what is it? Well, there are other herbs in besides adaptogens. In the Solle formulas, typically those herbs might be like, it could be like a super fruit or a tonic herb or other types of herbs like that are not necessarily adaptogens. So there's like 1, 2, 3, 6, adaptogens in each formula. And then there's like other herbs that they pair with it. And so actually, Greg, like what's the philosophy? Like you pair the tonic herbs with the super, like with a whatever, like I know you have a certain philosophy there. So what is that?
Yeah, and related to that question, it's a really good question because there are thousands of herbs that are beneficial to us. We know of maybe 50 or 60 that are adaptogens. That's how small a group is. There undoubtedly are many more that we just are not aware of. And all herbs, it is very possible that each herb can have 1 or 2 of those characteristics. I mentioned 5. So plants all have their characteristics. And we'll often say, oh, this is quite an adaptogenic herb, but if it doesn't have that complete balance is the key, then it's not going to be an adaptogen. That really is the difference maker. Dr. Allison would say it this way: if it modulates the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, and how that works in concert, in her mind, that's one of the key indicators or that gives it away that it's an adaptogen. Our philosophy is to always have a strong core of adaptogens first, and then to carefully pair other herbs if needed, according to the purpose of that product. So we might have, a gut microbiome like our ProBio IQ that is about repopulating the gut with friendly flora and with sharpening the function of the brain. So we'll look at herbs, both adaptogens and non-adaptogenic, that play well together to fulfill that objective. And really our philosophy is to be as complete as possible and to always have a fairly significant variety of ingredients, given that we're all different. And that's another strong, that's something built over 30 years in me. I have a really hard time when someone will take a product that's one thing and say, this fixes everything for everybody. Because the truth is, first of all, the truth is always plenty good enough when it comes to herbs. They're so amazing, and particularly adaptogens. The truth is more than good enough without exaggerating. So we will add other herbs in to complete the nutrition for whatever we are trying to address. And philosophically, that will be dominated by adaptogens, but include several, as Erica mentioned, could be tonic herb. It could be more of the soap herbs, the saponins or bitters that are a little more cleansing. It could be some of them that are more warming and heating, that have those volatile, essential, what we call volatile oils. Not essential oils would be the topical version of that. Or it could be the healing, soothing type, which are your mucilaginous herbs. And these are kind of how I collect them in my brain, that are about tissue repair and about terrain repair. We try to get a balance looking at all 4 of those areas in each formula, and hence they can be fairly involved, the decision tree on what we ultimately put in a formula.
I love that. And I love that explanation as well. And also it reminds me, what's interesting, I always love, and we say it all the time, like basically, the answer in Solle is always yes. Like, will this product help with this? Yes. Right. Like, and, but I love that because just in your explanation of your, core formulation philosophy is that essentially, like, even though it might be formulated for one thing, it benefits so many things, not just the brain and the body, but like so many different symptoms are going to be, checked off from that. And what I love about that is the reason why, like you take something and you feel it. Right. And oftentimes, especially with a drink, you'll feel it within, 20, 30 minutes, because it's affecting so many different processes in the body all at one time. Everybody, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate being on with you, and I look forward to sharing this time as we go through this optimal wellness journey together.